Hello creeps! Andy here, and today I would like to share with you the books that I read this month, which is November. I didn't read as much as I would have liked to. It was a pretty busy month. So I read 7 books. I guess that's like around what I usually read anyways. It just feels like I read a lot less for some reason. But this was the month of not loving everything that I read. I have some mixed feelings on a lot of this stuff. And so let's just jump into it. I know there's still a day or two left of this month, but I just started a longer book, so I'm not going to get anything else read. This is the first book that I read. I read Death by Pumpkin Spice by Alex Erickson, and a few months ago I did a whole video where I read pumpkin spice themed books, and this one I actually bought for that video, but it ended up getting lost in the mail. And so what is happening? So when I did finally receive it, I was like, oh, I'll just return it. And my husband's like, just keep it and read it. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll just keep it and I'll read it around October, like around the end of October. So I did. I read it for Halloween. And this just goes to show that not every cozy mystery is for me. It's called Death by Pumpkin Spice. Didn't even die by pumpkin spice. Definitely died by strangling. Like these, I don't understand. It's very weird. But it's about this it's about a girl she's dressed as Sherlock Holmes for a party. It's also number whatever in a series. So it's not the first one in the series. So maybe I missed out on some vital character building. But the main character was just kind of irritating. She was a woman dressed up as Sherlock Holmes at a party. Someone gets murdered and then she just butts in where she shouldn't. There are these really fancy people at the party and she just keeps going up to him and like, so the dead girl, right? I don't know. She's an absurd character. Didn't even die by pumpkin spice. Wasn't my favorite book. I'll tell you that much. But the next one I read, this is one of the favorites that I read this month. This is Whispers in the Mist. This is Darcy Coates' third in the Black Winter series. If you guys haven't picked these Black Winter series books up, I highly recommend, especially because we're getting into winter now and these books are so fun. The first one is more of like a romance story. The second one is more of an adventure story, and this one's more like heartbreaking story. There's more that tugs on your heartstrings in this one, but man, do I love these characters. I don't know what it is. I don't know how she does it, but she gets me into things that I just never thought that I would be interested in. This series is how I figured out that I don't mind romance in my stories, and I fucking love this couple. I love them. So I ended up buying the 4th one in the series to read this winter. I'm a little sad for the series to end though, because I could read a million books of this couple just like facing this apocalypse and trying to figure out what's happened to humanity and where these monsters are coming from and how to put things back together. Now in the 3rd one, well, I guess I won't give too much away just in case you haven't read the first 2, but it's basically, you know, the same thing. It's different, but the same. But yeah, highly recommend these series if you haven't gotten into them. I was really into this one. I just kept thinking about the apocalypse, and I just love Darcy Coates. I really do. Love that book. The next one that I read was The Slob by Erin Beauregard. This one I did a whole video on. I really did enjoy this one. This is an extreme horror book, just so you are aware. It's about this woman who was raised in a really dirty, filthy household, and her family had a lot of issues growing up, and so she became like a neat freak, and she ends up selling vacuums, and she ends up at the door of the Slob, who is this man who abducts women, and so she has to try to fight to survive. And there are some dark parts in here. Do not get me wrong. Some of the stuff was a little hard to read. You can check out that video if you want a little bit more detail about that. But otherwise, the only other book that I read from Erin Beauregard was Playground. And although the premise I enjoyed, the writing was a little bit wordy for me and it kind of took me out of the story. So I didn't know how I would feel about The Slob. And I really enjoyed it. I thought that this was an interesting story. I liked the character development and how things kind of come and wrap back around. And I enjoyed this one. I gotta say, I enjoyed it. Very disturbing, but I enjoyed it. The next one that I read was Story of the Eye. This is a very interesting book. I believe it's like erotic fiction is what it's labeled under, and it is. It's very erotic, but not in the way that I thought it was gonna be. It was much different than I thought, and I actually really enjoyed this one too. This can be, it's not horror and it's not extreme horror or anything like that, but it can be extreme in certain scenarios, you know, so keep that in mind. But it is more of a, well, the back just says that it's in his first novel, a legendary shocker that uncovers the dark side of erotic by means of forbidden obsession, fantasies of excess, and sexual extremes. And it is a wild story. It's very interesting. It was written, I think, in the 20s, if I'm not mistaken, 1928. So it's an older book. Not going to recommend to everybody, but was an interesting story. I did a whole reading vlog on that too, so you can go back and watch that. The next one that I read was Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. Oh, I have so much and so little to say about this book. Okay, let me start by saying that I understand why people would enjoy this book. It's about these 4 women. They go into a place called Area X, and they're not really told much about like why they're going there or their job going in there or what even is in there. They're kind of left blindsided by what they end up finding, and they're like the 13th expedition that ends up going in here. It is on Earth, but something has happened to the land, and we come to find out that it's continuing to spread. And so they go into, I just sort of investigate, I guess. Let me start by saying, okay, so I understand why people like this. And there are things that I really liked about this book too. The writing is fantastic. I highlighted so many lines in here, just line after line. Really, really great, extremely well written. However, it just wasn't a book for me. Honestly, I understand why people like this, and this I feel like is just more of a book for a specific audience. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't, and the audience wasn't me. I wasn't the target audience. So number 1 is I love science fiction. It's one of my favorite category of genres of books to read. And with science fiction comes a lot of world building. And when I purchased this one, I remember thinking, this is really little for a science fiction book. And so I figured that the world building would not really be in here. And I was correct in that. There are some lines, I mean, they go into Area X and there's like a tower and a lighthouse, but it's all things that we know and we can imagine. So there's not a lot of over description of the land. We get a few things here and there, but not really. And most of the focus is on the creatures in the land, in the area, as opposed to the environment. And so that's fine, I guess, because, you know, it's on Earth, and so we can figure out what it is. It's not like a traditional science fiction book that may take place on another planet that we need a little bit more context on, or in the future, or what have you. I think though, another issue I had with this was that it was interesting. It was so interesting because of how weird it is. But on the flip side of that, it was also so irritating because of how weird it was. So, and it also wasn't weird enough to make me feel satisfied reading it. Does that make sense? Like, the things that happen are weird, but it's in a tower on Earth. So it wasn't like a complete different planet where I had to take myself out of reality. Do you know what I'm saying? There was no information from the beginning to end. You don't get any additional information on Area X. And I really liked how we woke up with the characters, because they just woke up in Area X and didn't really know what to do or what was going on. And that's kind of how the reader feels picking this book up. So I really liked that, and I think that was done intentionally. But we don't get any other information. There's just really, like, from beginning to end, it just didn't feel like a full book to me. And I think that's what irritated me the most. And I wasn't as intrigued as I am with typical books. And it took me a long time to finish because I just wasn't really that into it. Really beautiful writing, really interesting story. But for me personally, didn't feel like it was enough for one book. And so I'm interested if you guys have read the trilogy, if you feel like it's worth reading the entire trilogy, and if you think I will feel more satisfied, because we got zero information. And as the book progresses, you get more and more confused on what's going on and other things that are popping up, but nothing is resolved. There's no resolution whatsoever. The main character is also pretty irritating to read her perspective. It's not even that she's just a scientist and more scientific based, she's just weird. She's a weird narrator. And so because everything is written in her perspective through her journal, everyone in the book sounds like her and feels like her, and it's not even just cold or removed, it's just weird. The little bits and pieces that we did get of her marriage and her like human side, I did enjoy, but it was so few and far between that it was really hard to like, and not that I have to connect with the character or anything, but it was just hard to read, honestly. And so, yeah, things that I did really enjoy about this book, and I did think it was interesting, but I thought it was equal parts interesting and frustrating. And, you know, I feel like that's probably the point of the book, because they don't even know what they're doing. They don't even know what's going on. So I do understand, but I do think that this book is for a target audience. Let me know how you guys feel about this one, because a lot of you really enjoyed this one. So I'm curious what you have to say about it. I love hearing your guys' opinions. If they differ from mine, if they're the same from mine. I think it's so interesting that I could talk about a book, how much I love it, and then the next person's like, oh, that's so interesting because I hate that book, or vice versa. So yeah, curious what you guys have to say about that and what it is that you like about the book, if it's the same things that I dislike or what. I just think that literature is so subjective from person to person, and it's really interesting to read varying perspectives. And you know, you guys teach me a lot too on how you guys feel about books, and you make me think differently about things, even if I didn't enjoy them and even if they weren't for me. But anyways, the next one that I read was Pines by Blake Crouch. I'm a huge Blake Crouch fan. I think he's one of the best writers in this day and age. I truly do. I mean, his writing is just so fantastic. This is about a man. He goes to a place, well, now I don't know if it's called Wayward Pines or Pines. I think maybe Wayward Pines. And he was in a car accident, and he wakes up and he doesn't really remember much, and things start slowly coming back to him, and he can't get a hold of his family on the outside, and people are just kind of like acting sketchy and weird, and he finds walls, and so he doesn't know if they're trying to trap him there or keep him there for some reason. This also is a trilogy, so I'm very excited to pick up the other parts, but Blake Crouch just has a way of distorting reality and making you feel really uncomfortable, and you just feel eerie. Everything just feels eerie in his books. And yeah, I love this one. I loved Recursion, and I love Dark Matter. Dark Matter is still my favorite just because I think I connected so much with that character, and I felt a lot of, I don't know, Blake Crouch has a way of just saying things that I didn't even know I was feeling, you know? Let me read this line to you. This is one of my favorite lines. He said, "There were moments when you saw the people that you loved for who they really were, separate from the baggage of projection and shared histories. When you saw them with fresh eyes, as a stranger might, and caught the feeling of the first time you loved them, before the tears and the armor chinks, when there was still the possibility of perfection." I just love his writing. He watched the stars go dark as the sun breathed fire into the sky. This one, the night sky hemorrhaging starlight. I mean, come on. His writing is just fantastic. He has a really interesting fusion of like thriller, science fiction, even a little bit of horror. And this book, for sure, for me, felt like a Twilight Zone episode. So I think that's also why I enjoyed it, because I honestly felt like I was watching the Twilight Zone. I know that it was inspired from a different show that I've never seen, Twin Peaks. It was inspired by a show called Twin Peaks, which I've never seen, but I'm assuming that it has to be kind of like Twilight Zone-ish, maybe, because that's how I felt reading this. Absolutely loved it. I love him. I think he's a fantastic writer, and if you guys are into science fiction, thriller kind of things, I think that you'd really enjoy his work. And the last thing that I read, my friends, was The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. And I closed this book and I said, what the f did I just read? Okay, I have a lot to say about this one too. These were, a lot of these were very, I had mixed feelings about, and I think that's what frustrated me most about this one, was how mixed my feelings were about it. Okay, so it's about a girl named Casey. Camera stopped recording, so let's get back to it. Okay. It's about a girl named Casey. She's fallen on some hard times after her husband passes away. She's a famous actress, but she's fallen into the habit of drinking a lot and kind of getting in trouble, getting fired from roles and what have you. And so she ends up being kind of banished by her mother to their lake house, which is quiet, ritzy area of only a few houses on this really beautiful lake. And she begins watching the married couple across the lake with binoculars, and I'm all for a trope of creeping in on people's personal business. I love movies and books like that, so I was all here for it, really interested in what would happen. And she starts to notice some weird things, and all of a sudden the wife goes missing, and so she gets the police involved, and she's very worried that the husband Tom had something to do with the disappearance. And so the story continues from there. That's kind of all the back says about it. Oh my God, what do I even say about this? How do I even articulate how I feel about this book? What's so frustrating about this book is that I did enjoy reading it, and it did throw me. It's a thriller, you know, I didn't see it coming. I didn't see any of it coming. And so it did its job in that sense. However, this is two separate books just put together. That's what it is. Like, things just take a turn and you're like, what are you talking about? And the things that like, you spend, you know, 200 pages trying to figure out if Tom had something to do with his wife's disappearance, and then the thing in the book that should be the most complex, convoluted, difficult to digest, all the characters are just like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And even the back of the book, the acknowledgments, the writer even says he's thanking his agent who cheered me on from the moment I first told them the bonkers plot of this book. Even he knows that this book is ridiculous. And so I felt like it was two separate books kind of just shoved together. I felt like the things that were the most extreme, unbelievable, were the most easily digested by the characters. I also felt like, similar to, because I don't hate Riley Sager. Some of his books I actually really enjoy. I think he's a really good writer, and even in this one, I liked how things came back around. I liked that, I think that a lot of the things in here were used as a metaphor, like being weighed down by your past and strangled by your past and things like that. And so I think that it was well written, but I think these were two separate stories shoved together. But kind of the same way I felt about The Only One Left, how the reason I like Riley Sager books is because I usually relate to the female character. I think he can write really great characters. And in these two books, because, and it's done intentionally, I'm aware of that, but because everyone's got kind of a secret and everyone's at arm's length from each other, you don't get to know the characters. And so in that sense, for me, personally, the characters in this felt a little one-dimensional. I didn't really care for them. I wasn't really interested in any like romantic plot line because they weren't like full-fledged characters to me. They weren't as well developed as some of the characters in his other books were. And I also feel like, for example, there's one character, he's just chilling in the background. He doesn't do anything to the story. Like, he really is just in the very background of the story, and not really much is brought up about him. And, you know, halfway through I'm like, why is this character here? What are we doing, people? And so I have very mixed feelings about this, and I think I also was interested to read it more because it was so freaking bonkers that I'm like, there's no way that it just did that. There's no way. Like, it's got to come back around somehow, and it was just a weird ride. I don't know that I've ever quite read a book like this before. I think it's my least favorite Riley Sager, or maybe it's tied with The Only One Left. It's hard to say. And that's what is so frustrating. And same with Annihilation too. It's like, I enjoyed the read, but it just wasn't a book for me. Maybe that's where I'll leave it. Yeah, it just wasn't a book for me. My cat also chewed it, so if this is any indication in how she feels about the book, I think she relates to me. I think we can agree on that one. So those are the books that I read this month. Kind of a wild roller coaster of books. Some I really, really enjoyed, and some I was just like, what is happening? So let me know the books that you read this month. Let me know how you feel about these ones, if you agree or disagree. Like I said, I always love hearing your guys' opinions, obviously, as long as you're respectful. I didn't think that that was necessary to say, but apparently it is. So yeah, as long as we're all respectful in the comments, I love hearing your opinions on how you guys feel about these things. Again, art is subjective, so if I like or dislike something that you do or don't, it's all good. I mean, that's why we're here, is to talk about the beauty of literature. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Bye, guys.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.